Currently, it was May 3rd in the year 1933 that James Brown is born. Soul Brother number 1, the Godfather of Soul, Mr. Dynamite, Sex Machine, the Minister of the New Super Heavy Funk. These are some of the names by which the world would eventually know James Joseph Brown Jr., the revolutionary musical figure who was born on May 3rd in 1933. The story Brown himself would often tell is that he appeared stillborn when he first came into the world, but that an aunt attending his birth managed to breathe life into him. Long before he changed the course of the 20th century popular music and crowned himself, quote, the hardest working man in show business, unquote, little James Brown may well have been the hardest working boy in Augusta, Georgia, where he was sent to live with his Aunt Honey in Washington at the age of 6. He spent the previous several years with his father, James Sr., who scraped out a meager living selling pine tar to the local turpentine factory in the woods of Barnwell County, South Carolina, just down the Savannah River from Augusta. James's mother had left with another man when James was only 4. While Aunt Honey would play something of a maternal role for James, the fact that she ran a brothel and sold moonshine for a living made for anything but a traditional upbringing. While other famous musicians of his generation would get their musical training in the traditional context of the church, James Brown would get his on the streets, where between jobs as a cotton picker, coal scrounger, and shoeshine boy, he also danced and sang to attract clients to his aunt's place of business. He honed his talents further in prison, where he was sentenced to serve 8 to 16 years for stealing from parked cars at the age of 15. An experience that might have broken another man, however, instead inspired Brown to dedicate himself to music. He did his first gospel singing while in prison, where he earned the nickname Music Box, and impressed his warden and the Georgia State Parole Board enough with his seriousness of purpose to win his release after only 3 years. At the age of 19, a highly motivated, worldly wise, and ferociously talented James Brown walked out of prison and began his climb towards music greatness. Born on this day in 1933, James Brown continued his eternity on Christmas Day in 2006. It was May 3rd in the year 1954 that the Supreme Court issued a momentous ruling that clarified the way that the American legal system handled charges of discrimination. In Hernandez versus Texas, the Supreme Court unanimously ruled that the 14th Amendment applied to all racial and ethnic groups facing discrimination, effectively broadening civil rights laws to include Hispanics and all other non-whites. The defendant, Peter Hernandez, was a Mexican-American agricultural laborer, part of the influx of such workers that had come to Texas during and after World War II. Hernandez was convicted of killing a man in cold blood in Jackson County, Texas, but his legal team, which was drawn mostly from one of the oldest Latino civil rights groups in the nation, the League of United Latin American Citizens, appealed. They poured through the records of jury selections in Jackson County, an area with a substantial Hispanic population, and found that not one of the roughly 6,000 jurors selected over the previous 25 years had a Hispanic last name. Citing the 14th Amendment, which had been passed in 1868 and guaranteed equal protection under the law to all African Americans, Hernandez's lawyers claimed he had been deprived of equal protection because discrimination prevented him from being tried by a jury of his peers. A Texas appeals court upheld Hernandez's conviction, but the case went to the Supreme Court. Lawyers for the state of Texas did not deny the charge of discrimination. Instead, they argued that such discrimination was not prohibited by the 14th Amendment, stating that it applied only to African Americans. Writing on behalf of himself and the other 8 justices, Chief Justice Earl Warren dismissed this notion, saying, quote, "The 14th Amendment is not directed solely against discrimination due to a two-class theory that is based upon differences between white and Negro. The decision that the 14th Amendment applied to all racial minorities, not just one its authors had in mind, has had immense consequences for the Hispanic community and every other minority group that has sought equal protection in the face of racial discrimination. As the civil rights movement progressed, Hernandez versus Texas ensured that every moment of legal progress for one minority was a victory for all. On May 3rd in 2007, less than 2 weeks before her 4th birthday, Madeleine McCann of Rothley, England, vanishes during a family vacation at a resort in southern Portugal. McCann's disappearance prompted an international search. However, she has never been found. In May of 2007, the McCann family, parents Jerry and Kate McCann, Madeleine, and her 2-year-old twin siblings, Sean and Amelie, were vacationing with a group of friends at the Ocean Club Resort in Praia da Luz, Beach of Light, a tourist village along Portugal's Algarve coast. On the evening of May 3rd, Jerry and Kate McCann went with friends to the Ocean's Club tapas bar, leaving a sleeping Madeleine and her brother and sister in the family's ground floor apartment located near the tapas bar. The McCanns and their friends agreed to check on the children every half hour. At around 10 p.m., Kate McCann went to the apartment and discovered Madeleine was missing. Portuguese police initially believed the little girl had wandered off and would quickly be found. As a result, they failed to promptly distribute a description of the missing child or search cars crossing the Portugal-Spain border less than 2 hours from Praia da Luz. McCann's disappearance generated widespread media coverage in Europe and beyond. English soccer star David Beckham made a televised plea for her safe return. And Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling reportedly donated millions to help find the little girl. Jerry and Kate McCann, observant Catholics, also had an audience in Rome with Pope Benedict, who blessed a photo of Madeleine. On September 7th in 2007, Portuguese officials named Jerry and Kate McCann, both of whom were positioned as suspects in their daughter's disappearance. Soon after, authorities leaked word that Madeleine's DNA had been discovered in the trunk of the car her parents rented in Portugal almost a month after she vanished. There was speculation that the McCanns, in order to enjoy an evening out, had given their children sedatives, and that Madeleine had a fatal reaction to the dosage she received. Afterwards, the McCann faked her abduction and hid her body for weeks before transferring it to the trunk of their rental car. Jerry and Kate McCann labeled this theory ridiculous, particularly given the fact that they were under intense media scrutiny and constantly followed by reporters. The local Portuguese police chief later admitted that the DNA tests were inconclusive. In July of 2008, Jerry and Kate McCann were formally cleared by Portuguese officials of any involvement in their daughter's disappearance. A third person who had been considered the case's only other formal suspect, a British man living in Portugal, was cleared as well. Additionally, Portugal's Attorney General said there was insufficient evidence for police to continue their investigation. The McCanns hired private detectives to keep looking for their daughter and have made publicity tours throughout Europe and the U.S. to raise awareness about her plight. historic information divulged on this audio file can be verified on history.com.